Welcome to Chapter 5 of Project Dracula. I can't even say it. Dracunalysis. Chapter 5. And last time we left Jonathan Harker fleeing Castle Dracula, and the next chapter turns to the attention towards his fiancée, Mina Murray. And the initial part is her writing letters to her best friend, Lucy Westenra, who is of more aristocratic background, except I don't really know necessarily. Sorry, let me put that on there. How they would necessarily have been friends, but we just don't have to worry about that. We just accept that they are friends and they knew each other. Who knows how or why or whatever, it doesn't really matter. So you notice again the novel's epistolary form. Now it shifts into letter, where we had journal form from Jonathan Harker, and now it's letters. And it's easy to forget that Stoker is writing as all of these different characters, and it's very noticeable how he shifts his style and genre to accommodate that as well. So he's very good at it, and you look at it and you can actually forget that he's writing all of this and he's adopting all these different persona in each of these different letters. So in this one we've got, at least initially, it's Mina, and it's the letters back from Lucy as well. But you also see plenty of other voices being adopted in this chapter. So it's really interesting. So we've left with a cliffhanger of Jonathan Harker escaping, and now it shifts to who's been referring to Mina, or Stoker refers to Mina in the first chapter, so it's not a complete surprise. So it's just going to be filling in another piece of the jigsaw puzzle. So you have the opening of the letter, which is known as a salutation. So Stoker has included that, "My dearest Lucy," and that's a salutation there. And obviously there's connotations of that closeness and affection. And in this era, of course, this is how friends would communicate over long distances. Generally, you could send telegrams if it was urgent, but letters is the most kind of standard form here. And it's quite interesting to pick out some of the things in here are very much like the modern equivalent would be people talking on social media or sending each other messages. Obviously, you've got the luxury of instantaneous communication, but you'll notice there is a slightly more formal style, but actually for the time, this would be considered quite informal, the way that they've written these letters. Or, sorry, they haven't, because they're not real. Stoker has written these letters. So let's have a look in a bit more detail there. But again, very realistic, opening with an excuse or an explanation, really as a mark of politeness, isn't it? Really to establish context of why you haven't written for a while. We have an idea of Mina's social status and her class as well, an assistant school mistress. So notice it's assistant school mistress, so she's working in a school, but she's not actually a fully qualified teacher herself. But she's a working woman, and she is very much like a modern woman of the era in many ways, but she's got some traditional elements about her as well. We have "I long to be with you and by the sea, where we can talk together freely and build our castles in the air." So there's a nice metaphor there again, but the idea of them just enjoying life and indulging in conversation and fantasies and things like that. So where we go with this? I mean, practicing shorthand very assiduously. You might be aware of what shorthand is, but it's almost like a special code that is used in journalism, secretarial professions, legal professions even. It's used to write very quickly. It's like a symbolic written language. And what's interesting here is Stoker actually contextualises some of the things that might have seemed implausible about this novel. It actually strangely explains that, unlike the world of Dracula, which is all these powers are supernatural, there's things in here, if you think, well, it's a bit far-fetched, isn't it? Like a man being able to climb down a wall and everything with Dracula. Really, that it shouldn't really bother you if you think, well, these letters are recording a lot of very detailed conversations and things like that. None of it should be a problem at all. But anyway, Stoker decides to contextualise it and explain in a lot of detail what actually happens and why some of the things in here are the way that they actually are. So one of them is about the shorthand. So writing letters in shorthand, he was keeping a stenographic journal of his travels abroad. So not Lucy, Mina and Jonathan are communicating, sometimes practicing the shorthand. And also, interestingly, a nice little anaphoric reference back to what we had in the first few chapters, which is we've been reading that very journal. Then about the diary, nice hyphenated compound here, 2 pages to the week with a Sunday squeezed in a corner diaries. That's a very informal element of the letter here, isn't it, as well? There's mention here, this will come back later on. Mina talks about lady journalists, so it looks here like she has aspirations to be maybe a journalist herself, and in those days it would be pre-modified with lady journalist for a female journalist, just because there weren't that many. It would be kind of clarified like that. Interviewing and writing descriptions and trying to remember conversations. I am told that with a little practice one can remember all that goes on or that one hears said during a day. So Stoker actually contextualises all of this incredible detail that we get, particularly from Mina, in the rest of the novel. Then we hear about, I hear rumours, and especially of a tall, handsome-haired man, which you've got this extended punctuation here, and it's not a reference to Ronald MacDonald, and we'll all be glad to hear, but this is actually referring to Arthur Holmwood, who is going to become an important character. Actually, all the characters introduced here are important characters for the rest of the novel. So we have Lucy's response, and again, Stoker is adopting a different persona writing this, and you can actually, there is a difference between Mina's style and Lucy's style, and you can see that coming through here, even just like straight away, like things like the italics used for emphasis. So there's more of a sense. I must say you taxed me very unfairly with being a bad correspondent. I wrote to you twice since we parted, and your last letter was only your second. This is very similar to the kind of thing that happens, in the present day, like between friends with like social media, and people might have to explain why they haven't been in touch, and someone gets offended because they've not been communicated with, those kind of things. It's very similar, isn't it? It's basically the same kind of thing. So actually that adds to the realism. Then the tall curly-haired man, not Ronald MacDonald, but it was Arthur Holmwood. And then this is a reference to a social event where they would have met. There's Mr. Holmwood, that's Arthur Holmwood. Then there's references to here. This is Dr. Seward he's talking about here. He's a doctor really clever, just fancy. Lucy's character uses fancy a lot, and it seems to be part of her idiolect. You can talk about that. Idiolect is like an individual's way of speak, or in this case, actually about writing, obviously, but it's part of her personality. These characters are young. All the characters in here are generally younger than you think they are, or not necessarily younger than you think they are, but they're younger than they're even depicted in films and things, because everyone just imagines Victorian stuff automatically a bit older, but Lucy's about 19 and Mina's about the same, I think. So it's all much younger than people imagine of these characters, or they're depicted in films. And there's a reference to, he's a curious habit of looking one straight in the face as if trying to read one's thoughts. So Dr. Seward in some ways reflects the early days in the late 19th century of they were starting to realise and have ideas about psychology and psychiatry, and it was in kind of early days. They were very early days of moving away from just locking up people with mental health problems to moving towards actually trying to understand and even treat people. They had quite a long way to go, but they're starting to shift in that kind of attitude. Where I know they're from my glass, that's a mirror. So you could use that as evidence of maybe there's a reference to that there, maybe suggests about Lucy's potential vanity. Lucy's a character you can see her, she could be, you might see her as quite flirty and enjoying that kind of aspect of her personality, maybe a little bit vain. She's also very naive as well, so it's a mixture of the two rather than, and a lot of films really do one or the other really in terms of the depiction of Lucy. That is slang again. So there would have been, for a kind of more socially higher up kind of person, sort of someone of social status, like using slang would be seen as a bad thing by older people, and it's obviously there's much less of a concern about that in the modern era, but it would have been something that, I suppose, for them as teenage girls, it would be kind of cooler, really. They wouldn't know the word cool, and that's slang in itself, but you see what I mean. But it's completely appropriate for these two communicating with each other because they're best friends, and so they can use the language. Basically, everyone has their own little speech groups where you have these yourselves, I have these, we all have these, where different people you talk to, you use language and words differently. And that's what Stoker actually captures in this. There's a sense of two friends who are on the same wavelength. They're part of the same speech group, therefore they use the same kind of language. Then we have at the bottom, I can't really highlight it down here because it interferes with the controls on my recording, so I'll try my best. Here we go. But that's about as far as I can go with it. I love him. I am blushing as I write, for although I think he loves me, he has not told me so in words. But oh, Mina, I love him, I love him, I love him. And you've got use of tricolon there for emphasis. Stoker again. And a lot of this is really just setting up future tragedy, actually. If you know what happens later on, you might not, but if you know what happens later on, there's important things being established in this chapter. And when you get to those, you can think back and come back and listen to this and you go, oh yeah. Or when you're rereading it. Stoker included this. It's not something I've really noticed actually much before. Wish I were with you, dear, sitting by the fire undressing. I think, is that being a bit saucy there from Stoker, like slightly, sexually suggestive of two young women on their own undressing, particularly for a Victorian readership as well. Ooh, it's a little bit fruity as a reference there. I think Stoker would maybe argue that he was doing it to show their friendship and a sense of that intimate relationship, that closeness, but I think there is a little bit of titillation going on there for Victorian readers, which is why the book partially, there's loads of things in this book that would be controversial, I should say novel rather than book, controversial for Victorian readers. But yeah. Then I need not tell you this is a secret good night again, so that's quite realistic again, reflecting two young women's relationship, to sharing secrets, saying not to say things, don't tell anyone else. Yeah, so it's again Stoker making it realistic in terms of their relationship here. This is the next letter where we get a response, and we have a revelation here of Lucy having had 3 proposals. So this is an interesting structural device for Stoker to introduce 3 male characters here, who are all 3 of them are interested in Lucy, but he sets it up in quite an interesting way where all 3 of them don't really seem aware of each other's interest in her as well, which actually also serves as a nice contrast between the closeness of Lucy and Mina, whereas we've got a gender difference here where the men, obviously they're all close friends, these 3 men, but they don't know who they basically fancy. So it seems a bit of it's very stark difference in gender attitudes here towards relationships. And again, it's particularly as Victorian men. These 3 men are quite different as well. Some girls are so vain. I think that's included to be ironic there, considering Lucy. I think she is more vain than she's letting on there. There's reflecting like social values of the time, I'm afraid. Women, I am afraid, are not always quite as fair as they should be. So, a bit self-critical of herself and women, but the society is patriarchal and society kind of favours men. They didn't have many divorces, but in divorce cases, custody would always go to men. The law favoured men on everything, generally speaking, with few exceptions actually, but I think it reflects this kind of wider cultural values. Then poor old Dr. Seward hasn't really got a chance really, particularly when Stoker has Lucy contextualise who he is as Dr. John Seward, the lunatic asylum man. That doesn't really make him sound like the world's best match, does it really? He's actually coming across quite awkward here, which is the 90s film, which is a flawed version, but it's got lots of good things in it. But one of the things I got is they do get a sense of Dr. Seward's awkwardness come through, but they do it in a bit more of an exaggerated way. I think he literally trips up over a rug. But he crushes somebody else's hat. He crushes Arthur's hat, I think, in the film. But anyway. But they do at least capture it's the same kind of flavour of what's happened here, because he almost managed to sit down on his silk hat right at the bottom there. It says very awkward. He's coming across here. It's a bit of a, to me, it makes him seem like almost like a stereotype of the bumbling scientist in some way. He's a very clever academic man, but he's slightly awkward socially. So we're getting, this is enabling through Lucy as a character. Stoker can present very efficiently these core character aspects of these people. And the lunatic asylum is very important to Dracula as a novel as well. So you'll be pleased to know this isn't a euphemism, or I hope it isn't. He kept playing with a lancet in a way that make me nearly scream. He's fidgeting with an object related to his profession and being a doctor. And he's trying to look cool, but he's actually fidgeting with it. And it's one of those things that we do. We'll be nervous if we might do something like click a pen or something like that, isn't it? That kind of thing. Okay, so he actually gives his own proposal as well. And then he asks, I've actually not really highlighted anything there in that big chunk, but most of it is just him. He makes his proposal, he's rejected, and then he asks, is there anybody else? Because he'd like to have an idea that if there isn't, there's still some hope he could be with Lucy. And then she says, actually, I am interested in someone else. So this paragraph then finishes, I feel so miserable, though I am so happy, where we've got antithesis here at the end. Then the next character in this scene introduced, my personal favourite, it's Quincy P. Morris, who I just love this because he gets cut out of most versions and adaptations of Dracula, but he's basically a cowboy, and he's a cowboy in Dracula, and I think most versions cut it out because I just think viewers just wouldn't be able to handle the gothic horror mixed with a western, and he just gets cut out, which is a terrible shame. But he's in there because it's, at the time, it was very fashionable and also very modern. It's easy to think, we always just think of the past and you kind of compartmentalised the past and everything. We think about Victorian London, but of course the world of the Wild West and America, that's going on at the same time in the 1890s. That's the same, and there's lots of misconceptions and things that aren't actually true about the Wild West, but it's actually going on at the same time. And in Stoker's time, it was really fashionable. It was really like a hot topic in the late Victorian era, where you'd get Wild West shows, you'd get marksmen, you'd get and horse riding. You get like Buffalo Bill and Andy Oakley, people. They would all come over. They'd meet Queen Victoria. Afterwards see these shows and everything. It was a big deal at the time. So that's my best guess of why there's a cowboy, and he's essentially a cowboy in Dracula. So he's from Texas. He represents the new world of America, which wasn't the most powerful country at the time. British Empire, way more powerful. America was really just a kind of up and coming as a country, really, at that time. And he represents a new world, but he's also got old-fashioned values as well. He's almost like a knight in some ways. And again, I think that's why Stoker put him into it. So he's from Texas. And then this is an interesting line because it shows cultural attitudes towards race here as well. So I sympathise with poor Desdemona when she had such a dangerous stream poured in her ear, even by a black man. So that's showing the kind of established racism of the Victorian era, where if you know in Othello, if you've ever studied Othello or if you're aware of it, Othello is a black general in Venice of you're really successful, highly important general, and he's married to a young white woman called Desdemona, and she fell in love with him because she heard Othello talk to her father about all of his adventures. And so it's a reference to that. But I find it quite interesting here how I think to modern Shakespeare audience, when you see that scene, there's I think to a modern reader you would just see it as, oh, she fell in love. That's how they fell in love. But Lucy here is saying it was dangerous. I can see how even by a black man. So the idea again, there's class associated with this. There's that kind of institutionalized cultural racism here as well. So I thought that was interesting. I thought that was an interesting angle. And if you don't know Othello, it's a really good play and it's worth looking at as well. Or you might end up studying it in the future. Who knows? So he's Quincy P. Morris, and he has got not only a great name, but he said Lucy says he doesn't always speak slang. That is to say, he never does so to strangers or before them, for he's really well educated and he has exquisite manners. So he's still set up he's still acceptable as a potential partner for Lucy, as a potential husband for Lucy, because he doesn't speak in cowboy talk all the time, but he does at other times. Because the argument is that she finds it entertaining, so that's why he does it. But there's more of you can see we've had several references to slang before as if it's bad, but obviously who cares really in the modern era, but it's fine. But I love all these. I love the dialogue of Quincy. Miss Lucy, I know I ain't good enough to regulate the fixings of your little shoes, but I guess if you wait till you find a man that is, you will go join them 7 young women with the lamps when you quit. Won't you just hitch up alongside of me and let us go down the long road together, driving in double harness? So that's brilliant. Look at we've got elision, or G dropping there, like fixings. Miss Lucy, the way that he addresses her, the vocative there, that's a good one. And the use of the verb quit, that's very kind of American as well, isn't it? Very kind of, particularly like the slang as well, or a colloquial use of that verb in that sense there. We've got this extended metaphor, just hitch up alongside of me, let's go down the long road together, driving in double harness. That evokes cowboys, doesn't it? And wagons and all those kind of things. This bit is a reference here, a biblical reference to the wise and foolish virgins, and you can look up the actual Bible story yourself if you want to, but the basic thing is the clue is in the name there, the wise and foolish virgins. Stoker is really alluding to it's Mina and Lucy. One's the wise one, one's the foolish one, and Lucy seems to be the foolish one, particularly in what happens later on. So just bear that in mind. That's the main thing for that one. Then I know, Mina, you will think me a horrid flirt. So again, where do you fall in on the idea of, is she deliberately flirtatious, coquettish, or is she naive, kind of unaware of the allure that she's got? See where you fall on that scale, thinking about it. I could say a word. He began pouring out a perfect torrent of lovemaking. That's got more innocent connotations in Stoker's time rather than how we might interpret that now. He's just being romantic, basically. More of this cultural, patriarchal ideas. Why are men so noble? We women are so little worthy of them. Why can't they let a girl marry 3 men or as many as want her and save all this trouble? So this isn't like a real kind of concrete desire. This is really the idea of kind of possibility. It's kind of hyperbolic, isn't it, really? She's kind of saying it. But again, you could have Stoker maybe alluding here to kind of different standards and attitudes towards men and women as well, particularly in terms of relationship. But this is also very clever because it is actually an indirect reference back to Dracula's 3 brides. Is that if you think what he does, he's evil and he's got 3 wives. I'm doing air quotes as I say that. You might have heard me. You could have imagined me doing that. Air quotes. He's got 3 wives, his brides, And of course, this also foreshadows Lucy's future fate as well. Very clever, isn't it, when you think about it? Ah, yeah. So it's better worth being late for a chance of winning than you than being. Sorry, I will say that again. It's better worth being late for a chance of winning you than being in time for any other girl in the world. So again, more romantic language from Quincy there, but he's got this old-fashioned chivalry about him. Little girl, that's another one he's there. Taking up, I think I just highlighted that because I wanted to remind everyone that he's a cowboy. There's hyperbole there. Oh, why must a man like that be made unhappy when there are lots of girls about who would worship the very ground he trod on? And that's also familiar collocation, isn't it? We've heard that phrase before. And Arthur, I needn't tell you about number 3, need I? Besides, it was also confused. It seemed only a moment from his coming into the room till both his arms were round me and he was kissing me. I am very, very happy and I don't know what I've done to deserve it. So, yeah, fast mover there from Arthur Holmwood. And it can't be any coincidence, I think, that Lucy picks, of the 3, she picks the one who is the son of a lord. So I'm going to leave that there. Then there's a shift from Stoker's style. So the new voice comes in of Dr. Seward himself, who's been referred to in this chapter. And notably, kept in phonograph, he's actually writing this is voice recording. So they did have the technology in those days. It was cutting edge technology. That's why Stoker puts this kind of stuff in, because it contrasts with the magical, not so much magical, but supernatural powers of Dracula. Modern technology can actually replicate these supernatural powers. We've got something here that can record your voice. And they've even got, in real life, there's recordings of Queen Victoria's voice, like made on these machines, But they were clunky by our standards, but they worked, they did actually. And what's happened actually is later on in the novel, we find out that all of this has been transcribed by Mina, using the very abilities about listening and using shorthand that she mentioned earlier on. It's all clever stuff. So we have very different style for Dr. Seward. Ebb tide and appetite today. So we have a kind of sea-related metaphor, like he's not feeling hungry at all. Notice how it's grammatically incomplete sentence as well. So it's, again, the idea of this is actually a multimodal text he's speaking, but it's been written up afterwards, is the idea. And he's sad, isn't he, because he's been rejected by Lucy. So he decides to go and see one of his most intriguing patients. I seem to wish to keep him to the point of his madness, a thing which I avoid with the patients as I would the mouth of hell. He finds this patient so interesting, he's doing something he wouldn't normally do, and he wants to study his madness. And also the mouth of hell reference, again, this is ironic considering that this novel is in the novel of Dracula, and Dracula is an agent of evil. And the character we're about to meet, Renfield, actually serves Dracula, so everything connects. You'll notice this one means everything in Rome was for sale. This one, there's lots of Latin phrases for Dr. Seward when it shows that he's highly educated background. And here's another one as well. So that's the reason for him putting those in. So we have here like a patient report as well, recorded. So sanguine is an interesting word, sanguine is an interesting word because it's got lots of different meanings. So it can mean he's sort of sometimes it means like optimistic. Sometimes it means blood. It's something to do with blood and related to blood as well. A very interesting choice of words. So you could say Stoker exploits the polysemic meaning of that word. Particularly, that becomes apparent later on when we see Renfield is a servant of Dracula. So we've got strange things about him: great physical strength, morbidly excitable, periods of gloom ending in some fixed idea which I cannot make out. I presume that the sanguine temperament itself and the disturbing influence end in a mentally accomplished finish. A possibly dangerous man, probably dangerous if unselfish. So Stoker is setting up Renfield, who it's not completely clear how he ended up coming under Dracula's spell. Some films make out that he was lawyer who went out to see Dracula before Jonathan Harker. It's not a bad idea, actually. Sometimes there's other reasons for it, or some films actually change it so it's not Harker going out there at all and it's actually Renfield going out. I've seen some like that. But he's probably just another person where Dracula's had lots of interest in England. He's had lots of different contacts, and he's just come into contact with him that way somehow. We don't really know. And again, like a lot of things in this novel, don't think too hard about it. We're not really meant to think about it. Then we have a letter from Quincy to the Honourable Arthur Holmwood. Honourable means that you're the son or daughter of aristocracy, or the lord, basically. My dear Art. Now, notice in the letter it's all using slang or colloquialisms, isn't it? So Quincy here is talking to his close friend Arthur. Again, not really explained exactly how these two very unlikely men, the cowboy, the Texan cowboy, and the aristocrat, the English aristocrat, would have met. But they've had loads of adventures together, which is brilliant as well. I love that idea. So his reference to some of them: trying a landing at the Marquesas, the shore of Titicaca. It's a great word. And then yarns. That's like colloquialism, isn't it, for colloquialism for stories. They also know our old pal Jack Seward, and Korea is a club. That's a club, not Korea as in the country. It means Korea as in there's a club called the Korea, and they met him there as well. They know him from there. But there's dramatic irony set up because Quincy thinks they're going to be able to share a drink about being rejected by Lucy without realising that actually it's Arthur who is marrying her. So again, the irony of they don't know about their own. They don't know about their own friends' own love interests and things. So we have. So the actual chapter ends with. Sorry, I was confused then because I saw two lightsabers appear. Then we have a telegram, which is a very modern way of communicating. It was near instantaneous. And we have a telegram: count me in every... You have to pay by the word. That was it. Count me in every time. I bear messages which will make both your ears tingle. More dramatic irony because Arthur Holmwood doesn't realise that these two other men have also proposed to the woman that he's proposed to. And again, setting up their relationship. And really important for stuff that happens later on to Lucy and the bond between these three men. It's, yeah, really effective. Plus all the other stuff about Mina as well. That's important too in this chapter. That is the end of that chapter. Just this page just got art. But that's interesting, the fact that it's actually them. And then he just signs off with the valediction. I forgot to say that for the other letters. When you end a letter or form of communication, a great word for a farewell is valediction. Great word. It means farewell. But he just uses his diminutive form of his name, Arthur, as Art. He's the Honourable Arthur Holmwood, but with his friends, he's just Art. So he's an aristocrat, but he's down to earth. He's got, varied friends of different classes and backgrounds. I doubt he hangs out with the chimney sweeps and stuff like that, but you know what I mean. He's got a friend who's a cowboy. He's got a friend who's a doctor who runs a lunatic asylum. And it gives you an idea of these three men, the closeness of their relationship. Anyway, I will stop now. I hope you found that useful, and we will carry on in the near future. Well, I say near future, hopefully the next one is there. Just press a button and you'll listen to it. But anyway, thank you for listening. Like, subscribe, do all that stuff. Listen to my other stuff, watch my other videos. Thank you for listening.